What I want to know is, the culture war. When did the culture war part of it become something that you cared about? Because it does seem like you, as much as you care about the Bitcoin and crypto industry stuff, you also care about the culture war, the testosterone, the men, the women.
We'll get to that. So first of all, I actually don't care about the culture war stuff as much as people would think from reading my tweets. What I really want.
You use the language.
Yes, to win an election.
Hey everybody, Pete Rizzo, host of the Supply Shock podcast, here to preface the following feature interview with our special guest, Ryan Selkis. Of course, if you know Ryan, you'll know that he's no stranger to controversy, both for his brash, anything-goes online persona, but also for his role as one of the principal architects of the crypto industry's recent bankrolling of President Donald J. Trump's quest for the 47th presidency. It's an event that remains a lightning rod within mainstream media and culture. From last week's Economist cover story warning how crypto will, quote, not end well in Washington, to today's headlines from Bloomberg to the New York Post discussing the downsides of the Trump family's involvement and investment in our industry. We recorded the interview due to its historic value, the historic nature of Ryan and his work. If it be said that crypto has gone mainstream, it owes a debt of gratitude to Selkis, who's been working on its critical company since 2014, and who continues to influence the direction of industry spending. A word of warning. You might not agree with or even like everything you're about to hear Ryan say. There are many points on which he and I still disagree. However, we've invited him here to face scrutiny, to tell his story in his own words. So in that spirit, we invite you to consider the man and his methods in the following interview. Nothing said on Supply Shock is a recommendation to buy or sell any investments or products. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions, not financial advice or necessarily the views of Blockworks. Our hosts, guests, and the Blockworks team may hold positions in the company's funds or projects discussed.
Ryan Selkis, founder and CEO of Solomon AI, as well as other illustrious companies in the crypto space, including Messari and CoinDesk. We'll give you CoinDesk as well.
Refounder, I guess. We can both get credit for that one.
Okay, where do we begin?
Social pariah.
Yeah, social pariah. Well, let's start there, right? There's a lot of people, I think, who, are maybe happy that you're exiting the Bitcoin and crypto space. I thought maybe we could start with just sort of, me and you have a long history, and maybe we could start there with, that time period. You were already a believer back then.
Yeah, from 2013. It instantly clicked when I read the white paper. And my second month in the industry was when Vitalik down in Miami, introduced the concept for Ethereum. So it was obvious how passionate people were. It was obvious what the core innovations were, how powerful, these triple entry accounts were, and the concept of stateless money. And
you had the blog,
but
right?
it took it was going to take quite a bit of storytelling, quite a lot of sales, and kind of a sustained effort to actually support companies, innovators, ideas from good people, and that were getting built out in the right way. And remember back then you had the collapse of Mt. Gox. A few months before that, you had the arrest of Ross Ulbricht, which is now, of course, come full circle. But
maybe I'll define you a little bit. Like, you were a bit of a whistleblower, right? The Mt. Gox, this was the largest exchange in the industry that was insolvent, that was operating unethically. They were running a business, presenting it as if it was a solvent business. They were accepting customer deposits. They were allowing customer trading. And this was a house of cards that you were the one who kind of pulled the sheet off of that, right? I know we've quibbled about how you've done that over the years, but famously you published this blog post saying you sold all your Bitcoin. You had reason to believe that this organization was insolvent. You wouldn't say kind of what had happened, and then you eventually published that later. But that was an act of whistleblowing, right? Like, you were trying to do something to help the industry at that time.
If you remember Mt. Gox, their plan, and the reason I had leaked those documents. What was it, $700 million bankruptcy? So
they lost 700,000 Bitcoin.
700,000 Bitcoin. So this was like a huge kind of existential moment for the industry. But the reason that I had published the documents in the first place was because they were planning on opening up the next day, and
they were trying to actively fundraise for the business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Earn real yield on your Bitcoin by simply holding it. Trustless Bitcoin staking with Core means no lending, no bridging, no wrapping, no swapping, no new trust assumptions. Simply lock up your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, help elect validators to secure Core, and earn your share of core token rewards. This isn't a promise or point system. This is real, liquid, and live yield, fueled by activity on the largest Bitcoin DeFi platform. And to earn even more, multiply your rewards tenfold by dual staking Bitcoin and core tokens, meaning your core token rewards become the key to unlocking even greater yield. Start earning core and put just 1% of your BTC to work. Start staking at stake.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. As always, investments and blockchain technology involve risk, terms, and conditions apply. Do your own research.
Well, okay, so you had these moments kind of early on where you tried to clean up the industry, and then you end up joining Digital Currency Group with Barry Silbert. And so at that point, you were dedicating your career to Bitcoin and crypto stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been what you were thinking.
Yep. Yeah, and DCG, the founding was we're going to build, buy, incubate companies, invest in companies, and just generally try to take advantage of our access to capital to accelerate the development of the industry. And that manifested in a portfolio with 100 of the leading companies at the time. And we acquired CoinDesk in part to
I remember being at a conference,
make sure that there was
and I was worried about the future of CoinDesk, right? CoinDesk was an institution that I felt should exist. I felt like there needed to be some sort of public place for people to get good information about what was coming out about Bitcoin and crypto stuff, because there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of community cheerleading. There wasn't kind of a place. And I remember coming to you at a conference, I think this was in Miami, and saying, what do you think about the future of CoinDesk? And you said, there's no future to the industry where CoinDesk is not involved. And I remember, kind of taking that to heart. Eventually, you came in with the acquisition. I remember you brought us to New York, and a big reason why I stuck on with CoinDesk, was you were agreeing to be CEO. So you were my boss at the time. We had some clashes. There was a good creative environment there at CoinDesk. One of the things I do remember was that there was kind of a lack of political conversation. We didn't really feel like Bitcoin or crypto was something that was politicized. Some of us were political, but by and large, what I remember from that era is that
I didn't really care at the time. Yeah.
Well, I was saying, I do remember you sort of banning conversation about Trump, like within the newsroom. And
I think at the time it was a distraction. It was like, this doesn't really impact what we're doing day to day. So if you want to talk about it outside of work or whatever, just no reason to get people heated.
Yeah, but by and large, you sort of,
Yeah, I don't think that I was censorious, but at that point, crypto was still in its infancy. It wasn't really on the national radar for regulators. At that point, it was just such a blip on the radar for regulators and and political figures worldwide that it didn't really matter. And it didn't really matter, quite frankly, until 2020 when things started to come roaring back.
Well, because I remember our political context being, we were both from the Northeast, maybe a little left-leaning, because that's where things were at the time. I believe you supported Hillary, and you also supported...
I never supported Hillary.
You never supported Hillary, okay. So
I did vote for Biden in 2020.
You did vote for Biden in 2020. Did you vote for Trump in 2016?
No. So first of all, I was in a state where it didn't really matter. So I think I wrote in my grandfather.
Because I didn't vote in 2016, but I don't remember politics defining you. I have no sense of your political.
Mostly because I used to identify as, I think, more libertarian leaning, and my thinking was build the tech, right? Like tech is an exit. You can build a better future. Politics is a distraction. Just focus on tech. Just focus on tech because you can control that. It's apolitical tech, and I think that was true for a while. And really the radicalization process, if you want to call it that, started in 2021 under Biden when they started to slap us around. Maybe arguably in December 2020 when Steve Mnuchin, the former Trump Treasury Secretary, had come out with this midnight rule that essentially would have banned self-custodial wallets, right? Then that was
this was under the Biden administration.
No, that was under the Trump
administration.
first Trump, but it was during the lame duck.
This was
right?
like at the last.
Yeah, they tried to like sneak it through. It didn't get through, and so it was like, okay, changing of the guard, screw Mnuchin, and we'll give Biden a chance, right? New president, he campaigned that he was going to be a moderate and a return to the center, and Trump at that point was doing nothing to tamp down some of the kind of worst impulses of his base, or even discourage that type of behavior. So looking back, I've always said it wasn't clear to me whether he was the chemo or the cancer. Election day 2020, and it almost didn't matter because all you knew was we need a break between rounds of chemo.
So where is Ryan Selkis on January 6th, 2021? Mentally, you voted for Biden.
Well, I was just like, it's just kind of like shaking your head, and it's like, this is a clown car. We just need to get past this. I was never like clutching my pearls, like, oh my God, because this guy with a Viking helmet on, made it into the Capitol. All of a sudden, it's like an armed insurrection where the country is going to fall. Like, our military has heavier artillery than, like a Trident or whatever some of these clowns were.
Yeah, it's not like there's a magic lever
using during their tour of the Capitol. So, I mean, it was an embarrassing day. It was awful what happened. I'm not trying to discount that, but, I never really bought into the, this was an insurrection or this was, an attack on democracy. It's, everybody take a minute and give Biden a chance. Let's see how his personnel do. Let's see if we could have some good engagement with the industry.
Well, there was optimism at the time, right? Gary Gensler was viewed as someone who would be
taught at MIT. Oh, this guy knows what he's doing.
He gave the Bitcoin presentation, and there was a lot of optimism about the Biden administration. Yep. So where do you think that soured? Where does the Biden administration? They came in with some hopes and expectations. They would at least be net neutral. The industry. Where does that collapse?
Well, there's two things. One that wasn't really the Biden administration's fault, but it was when they passed the infrastructure bill over the summer, they had some pretty gnarly anti-crypto provisions in there, almost by accident, because it was something called a pay for. They essentially said, okay, if we close this loophole for self-custodied wallets and make all the DeFi companies and projects do tax reporting, it'll stamp out tax fraud and underpayment, and so that'll get us $28 billion or something like that for the rest of this infrastructure bill. It was really like an afterthought, but the way that they actually got that jammed in, and then the inability of the industry to get it basically carved out because it was nonsense. And
there was no lobbying infrastructure or advocacy.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So the way that it happened was basically the Democrats were 100% anti, or so it felt. And they were just ramming this through, and they're going to kill the industry in the process. So that was kind of one. And then the other was, it just started to become obvious that you were going to hit a brick wall with the SEC.
So where does, so obviously, the Biden administration is bad. Where does Trump start? So we have early, in 2024.
Yeah, so 2021, there was the infrastructure bill. That fall, 2021, like a month after the infrastructure bill, we hosted Mainnet in New York. It was like the first, New York conference, like post-COVID. And we had the event, I'd say, which was, we're going to get all the folks that are even tangentially around policy in the same room and talk about, how to build a lobbying machine. So we don't have something like what happened with the infrastructure bill happen again.
This would have been like the regulatory leads at like the exchanges, the miners, all that.
So there was like 20 of us in a room. And
you organized this.
Yeah, organized it like at Mainnet. So we got everybody there, in one of the conference rooms upstairs. A lot of work gets done in the montage that next 12 months. CCI comes out. Sheila Warren, starts staffing up CCI. Kristen Smith does a great job building out the membership of the Blockchain Association. Coin Center has more funding. DeFi Education Fund gets funded. A bunch of kind of good pillars that are still around today. And then a bunch of the crypto companies hire real government affairs people and policy leads and staff up on their legal teams. So the next fall, we have Mainnet 22. I got everybody together for a dinner at Mainnet, same group basically, and it was supposed to be celebratory, a little bit more low-key, not as many action items. Basically just say like, hey, Mazel Tov, look at how far we've come. And it was at that dinner that FTX was the only group that was pretty heavily involved in policy that wasn't there and in attendance at this dinner. And someone at the dinner, Kristen, basically said, can we talk about the elephant in the room that Sam is trying to screw us all with this, FTX bill that they're pushing, under the lame duck, trying to get it in before the midterms. And then all hell broke loose, and a bunch of side conversations. We ended up scheduling, and I organized another policy meeting a couple of weeks later in DC with FTX this time, and basically trying to corral them, or at least get them to play nice with the other companies in the industry, and not just totally ram their own pet project through because of how
they wanted to onshore, and they were
spending money, left and right in DC, and that I think was a big part of what led to Sam's undoing, because CZ had learned about all the unkind things that Sam and his team were saying about Binance, during these meetings in DC, and that kind of led to that public spat, which of course led to CZ saying, "Well, I'm going to sell my FTX tokens," and that's really what kind of started this whole chain of events.
All of a sudden, Bitcoin's at $15,000.
Yeah, exactly. So it all had this kind of undercurrent of policy throughout, and post FTX collapses is basically right after the midterms, and you're just looking around like we're fucked. The SEC started to go nuts, kind of spraying and shooting at anything within the industry. They kept blocking the ETFs from getting approved, even though they were the most plain vanilla financial products that you could possibly imagine. A lot of really shady stuff, but they wanted to make an example of an industry that they felt had besmirched the Democratic Party. That I think really what a lot of this came down to post FTX. And then we are in an existential fight on the policy front, and we need to defend the industry, and we need to be able to be better at storytelling and throwing out the bad actors, which, by the way, something that I basically spent the previous 6 or 8 years at that point. So Brian Armstrong got folks together in February 2023, and it was about a dozen of us at dinner, and it was super productive. I give him credit for kind of getting the group together. What I had basically laid out during that dinner, based on all the time that I'd spent with all these policy teams from the FTX drama and kind of hosting these other side events, was here are the different prongs that we need if we want to actually get through the other side of this. And the next month, I laid out a document that I called Project Leonidas, which was $100 million campaign to save the industry. So political campaign for crypto. We need a super PAC that's going to have this amount of money. We need a 501c4 that's going to work on messaging and candidate recruitment. And we need the Blockchain Association and CCI to be well staffed. We need these legal funds in place. We're going to need to throw sand in the gears and these districts and things like that. And obviously I didn't do really any of that. We didn't have the budget to do it at Messari, and we also didn't have standing because we weren't one of the impacted companies. But what I did do is I architected, what this should look like, and try to bang the drum and get people to take seriously that this is the structure of the campaign. Here's how the machine works in DC. And most importantly, here's the amount that it will take. And it will be extremely high leverage if we actually get this amount of money in, because we'll be one of the biggest players overnight in the space. Turn around, by the end of the year, A16Z, Ripple, Coinbase, they load the money cannon in fair shake. We've got a couple of those entities funded, and it kind of looks like we're off to the races.
You can now earn real yield on your Bitcoin by simply holding it. The Core blockchain, Bitcoin's leading scaling solution, rewards you for keeping your Bitcoin right where it is. Here's how it works. Core is secured by a group of validators. When you lock up your BTC using Bitcoin's native time lock, you help elect validators to secure the Core network. In return, your validator earns rewards and passes them back to you. While time locked, your Bitcoin never leaves your wallets. No bridging, no lending, no counterparties. When the time lock expires, you get it back, completely untouched. Still your keys, still your coins, now your yield. Want to earn even more? Lock up Core tokens along with your BTC to unlock higher yields through dual staking. Learn more and get started at stake.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. As always, investments and blockchain technology involve risk, terms, and conditions apply. Do your own research.
But you are the first person in the industry to appear on stage.
Yeah, but so this is all kind of going on behind the scenes.
But there were people within Bitcoin cryptosphere who were historically Republican, like maybe a David Bailey type person.
But no one could actually get there, right? And I mean, David, to his credit, I mean, I think, and look, I don't really care about who's, I think some people think that I want all this credit for being first. So like David and I were like, we were just objectively first. I know that because I was we were in the room. We're like, it's well documented.
Yeah,
right?
New York.
So David was coming from the obviously like Bitcoin maximalist side. Like we need to protect the miners. We need to get the ETFs across. This needs to be a reserve asset. We need so he's like very like laser focused on that. And I had kind of like brought the crypto elements and had kind of shared with folks around the Trump campaign what I thought would be a killer like 6-week engagement play with extremely minimal work from Trump himself, right? So it was essentially like, throw in a couple lines here at the libertarian speech, and he hits,
Ross
Ulbricht and financial privacy, and your ears perk up. And remember, this is right around the time that those bills are coming through Congress. And the Mar-a-Lago event happens where President Trump had hosted an NFT event down at Mar-a-Lago on May 8th.
Yeah, there's the guy with the
May 7th
glasses who raises his hand and he says,
and there's kind of big Q&A in the garden at Mar-a-Lago, and then a reception afterwards.
If you like crypto, vote for Trump.
Yeah, and he called me and one other entrepreneur on stage, just cold called. And I didn't, I thought he was going to shake our hands or whatever. And then all of a sudden, next thing.
But you had no prior interaction with it.
No prior interaction. First time I met him was on stage, shook his hand. Why don't you say a few words? And then.
How did he know who you were?
His team had kind of slipped. Here are a couple of like the more notable or like well-known entrepreneurs in attendance, and so the two of us got called up on stage and I spoke for a minute. It's instantly going to go viral. Like my board was pissed that I was going, period. My team was very concerned about it. I was like, don't worry about it. I'm just going to go down there. Hopefully, like I'll be able to meet a couple of folks from the campaign team and talk to him, maybe shake his hand. I had no idea it was going to go supernova and I was going to be given like an impromptu, endorsement speech. And then I finish up and, I shake his hand and there's a gangster picture of me shaking his hand, which, we used to great effect. And so I just unilaterally started, posting that picture and like menacing Liz Warren, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, saying like, Trump's on our side, handshake picture, Trump's on our side, like we're coming, double barrels. And you started to see, I was pissing off a lot of people. Look what happened. I mean, we're kind of getting a climax here, but so many people were afraid. And sometimes it's hard for people to remember and go back. But we're now like a year past this. But at the time, in Q2 of last year, I mean, Trump is getting 34 felony convictions. He's run away with the nomination, but now they're relitigating January 6th.
Well, Joe Biden was still the nominee.
He was still the nominee. He's perfect, sharp as a tack, right? Like, and so it was I had to come out of Mar-a-Lago. So first of all, even going down there, I didn't know it was going to be public, but even going down there, I had to prepare for going down to Mar-a-Lago in case anyone saw me, as if I were myself a political candidate.
Prepare like
how are you going to prepare if someone's like, well, how do the women and sure enough, my very good friends at Blockworks, had an op-ed that ran like 2 days after Mar-a-Lago, which was essentially like, you don't need to leave your morals at the door just to like pump your bags. That was essentially the gist. But I knew that was coming, right? And so at that point, you have a couple of different options. One, you lean into it and double down and triple down and use the leverage that you have and do the dirty work, or you kind of timidly go back in your corner. And you've known me long enough to, you probably would have predicted how this shaped out and went exactly as you'd expect.
I do want to talk a little bit about the culture wars component of this, right? Because it does seem like,
if you support Donald Trump, it's not because you're pro-crypto, it's because you don't care about marginalized communities. That was what they got on anyone in tech, and that's how they kept everybody in line. Because they had full narrative control of, if you support this evil man, this bigot, this racist, this xenophobe, this misogynist, this ist, you are a bad person. And how can your team even look you in the eye, much less your customers? That was the play. And so you really only have, you have two options after you're on stage like that. You can say like, I didn't know I was going to be on stage. My bad. I just want us to have like a bipartisan consensus around crypto. Okay. Congratulations. You just walked away from someone that just gave you an olive branch. Or two, double down. I know all these issues hold. You're not going to bull me into a corner. This is right for the industry, but also on a bunch of other dimensions, your arguments are bullshit.
But a lot of the other crypto industry executives maybe broke for Trump. They were still funding or looking for inroads to the Democratic Party until very late in the summer.
Well, yeah, I mean, a bunch of people broke for Trump, and then the second that Biden dropped out, Queen Kamala, it's a morning in America. It's a brand new day. She's so nice. And all we need to do is get in a room with her. I'm sure she'll be very reasonable. And you felt all of the energy start to go immediately back to, well, it's not Biden again. It's going to be a new sheriff in town. And, we have to really think about, we could have a younger, more forward-thinking Democratic leader that's actually going to engage with us. I was like, okay, well, show me where the evidence is.
There was an effort to get her at the Bitcoin conference.
In office, right? Yeah. So that was...
But where does this become a culture wars component? Because there's a lot of other industry executives who did break right, but they didn't maybe wade into the issues like maybe you did in terms of making it about women,
Did they?
Sorry?
When did they break right?
Much later. But what I want to know is, the culture war. When did the culture war part of it become something that you cared about? Because it does seem like you, as much as you care about the Bitcoin and crypto industry stuff, you also care about the culture war, the testosterone, the men, the women.
We'll get to that. So first of all, I actually don't care about the culture war stuff as much as people would think from reading my tweets. What I really want.
You use the language.
Yes, to win an election, right? Because, and I can talk about like the electoral math. I mean, it speaks for itself, right? The election swung and hinged on young men coming out in droves and offsetting the young women vote, point blank. Every single major demographic went for Trump except for young women. Married men.
And it's clear why, right? Because of the abortion.
Well, so that was one thing, and that was what everybody was, would basically pin on you and like project on you, like if you are supporting
it's a women's rights
Donald
issue.
Trump, then you're actively saying that the overturn of Roe v. Wade doesn't matter. And I was a hard ass on that issue because my argument was, you don't understand how the American constitutional system works if you think that electing Kamala Harris is going to change that Supreme Court decision. Yeah. Unless you're going to eliminate the filibuster to try to ram that law through, and unless you are going to pack the Supreme Court, which are DEFCON 5 levels.
I gave that argument at the time, but did you feel like you had to use that language? Why did you use that language? Because other people didn't. Like, I'll contrast you with David Bailey and say that David didn't wade into the culture war stuff. He didn't weaponize kind of sex or race or that kind of stuff.
So first of all, I only did this after I knew it was going to be out, right? So post Mar-a-Lago, I had sat down with my team and said, look, I'm going to get all the flack for this. There's a chance that I'm not going to be able to run this company anymore. Because even if we don't get public pushback, customers are going to start backing away. There's going to be executives that start to just fucking seethe and resent me. And they did. Yeah. But the worst thing that can happen is for that to happen and for no one to ever say anything. So in those couple of months, post Mar-a-Lago and before my official like announced exit, I had already kind of prepared my team, my board, and also just started to try to take out as many of these Democratic operatives that were operating in bad faith in Silicon Valley as I possibly could, right? I was like, I'm going to be a fucking suicide bomber to take as many of these guys out as possible. These scumbags that were doing every single dirty trick that you could possibly imagine to silence founders that would dare have the audacity to come out and be pro-Trump, drag them into the deep water. I was like, someone has to pick this fight. We're already going to get all the negative blowback. I'm already going to get called every name in the book. Our team is going to suffer. I need to do my succession planning right now because at the end of the day, I'm not going to back down on pure principle, but also because it wouldn't be in our best interest. The only thing that matters for this industry and for our company is making sure that there is a change in the White House. That is the single highest leverage thing that I felt that I could do at the time, and that I did do. And part of that was shifting the Overton window, hammering some of these guys, and that's why there was loaded language. And this bore out in the polls, right? The Democrat Party to this day has a masculinity issue. It's a loser for them. They lost men, probably for a generation. So every bit of messaging for those few months, this guy's a spineless coward. This guy's a bitch. Like, do you want to, wake up in the morning and tell your kids that you were like so-and-so, or do you want to be a man and try to like fix the country? Just relentless. But if you know that you're going to go that direction and you know you're going to.
But do you actually believe that, or do you just think it's good messaging? Like it's just you're using a strategic messaging.
I mean, obviously it's messaging, right? Obviously.
Because you said a few things that really rankled people. One was die in a fire.
When did I say it?
When did you say it?
40 minutes after he was shot. Right now, 55% of Democrats think that it would be justified if he was assassinated.
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah.
55%.
Yeah. Are you surprised by that?
I'm the problem for clearly tweeting something of hyperbole, which was at this point, fuck you. He just got up and said, fight, fight, fight after he got shot in the head. He's doing this for the right reasons. He's, a brave leader. And you've been throwing everything at this guy and everything at everybody that supports him. You know what? Gloves are off. Yeah. Should I have tweeted it? No. But at that point, I had already made my decision that I was going to be out at Messari. So again, if you look at this through the lens of, I am going to shoot at everybody that I think is operating in bad faith, and I'm going to try to take out every single opponent and marginalize them, the same playbook that they've used for a decade in tech. I'm going to use the same thing against them, and I'm going to go right for their balls and try to silence them.
But let's just take another example. I hope you get deported. This was something you tweeted about.
That was a bunch of nonsense.
But why? What does immigration have to do with Bitcoin and crypto? Why bring it into the conversation?
No, it had nothing to do with that. I mean, that's my point. At this point, I'm single-minded on what can you do in the messaging wars to essentially just give the finger to anyone and say, like, you're not going to cancel me. You're not going to shame me or kind of guilt me into like backing away from a candidate that I think should and must win for all these reasons. And like, that's it. I'm not going to apologize for any of the issues that you think I should apologize for. And immigration's a perfect one, because you'd be like, well, what about, what about this? Do you really think that you should, do you really think that like all these, you're going to deport 20 million people? No, that's not the point. But the reason that like we've lost so much ground, and the reason the country is in the shape that it is, and the working class wages have been depressed the way that they are, is because your side has thrown out the entire social contract and used emotional blackmail that works on bitchy men to basically have their way. And then, oops, they're here now. What are we going to do about it? I mean, it's maddening. I truly, truly believe that our treason laws are meaningless.
So you think you had to risk alienating women in order to make this point?
Well, the thing is, I wasn't, like, what did I say that was wrong?
About what? About the immigrants?
No. I said this election is going to hinge on whether unhinged radical feminists on SSRIs come out in droves for Kamala Harris.
But there are a lot of people who would say this. What does that have to do with the cause of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which want to eliminate national borders?
The
borderless currency.
No, you're conflating two different things. What I'm saying is, when all of that rhetoric happened, this was post me exiting.
Like Elon didn't go out and he wasn't.
This was post me exiting Messari. Like at that point, it was over.
So in your mind, you weren't representing the crypto industry when you were doing that?
No, it was, we need this guy to win the election at all costs. And you can argue with my tactics. Hey, did that move anyone one way or the other? But there was two components of that. One, can you fire up enough young men and make it safer for them to start coming outside and voicing their support? And two, can you demoralize enough Kamala Harris supporters in the process and silence them and essentially say that they're weak and pathetic for
the big conversation about the whole election, and I think, in the Bitcoin and crypto world, is like, did we sacrifice our principles in order to get these wins? And people have questions about that, right? I mean, we do want to build a borderless financial system, right? That is something that doesn't have anything to do with...
Did we sacrifice our principles to get these wins? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Donald Trump is the reason that crypto has a moral crisis right now.
Well, we'll get into the future of crypto stuff, but you don't sympathize with the point of people who are saying you didn't need to conflate these things. The culture wars didn't need to come to
Losers always complain about your tactics. I should be getting a fucking thank you note from people in the industry, and I'll die on that hill. Losers will always complain about your tactics, but you know what? If you walk people through step by step, every single decision I made, up to and including being willing to step down from my own company that I ran for 7 years, and I love my team, everything was designed to get the maximum impact and clarity and good outcomes and fair outcomes for crypto. Not a handout, but something that is a sustainable base that we can build off of. And there's only a couple of people that stepped up. So I've given people my rationale for why I pursued the strategy that I did. It all boils down to one thing. Someone had to do the dirty work. And someone had to hit some of these guys in the mouth in Silicon Valley. And once you go down that road, you can't half-ass it. You can argue whether it was wise. You can argue whether was it nice? No, I wasn't nice to people. I know that. And I feel bad about that, but I don't give a shit about nice. What I would like to see is a kinder, better country that doesn't have all these structural problems that I think would have been inevitable and a path to collapse if Kamala Harris had won. And I put it all on the line to actually bring that to fruition. Did I lose something personally in the process? Honestly, I don't think so, because at a certain point, I knew that my team was going to be able to take the reins. I knew that I was going to be dead weight loss on the rest of the team because I was going to get, no matter how much I backtracked, we were going to take the flak. So I might as well, what would be worse? I go with my tail between my legs, have a couple of jabs, a couple of quick wins, and then I have a bunch of customers that are pissed off and a bunch of my team that doesn't like me and this, that, and the other thing. Or go out guns blazing. The team is like, we hate Selkis, he needs to go. The half of the team that loves me, you know what, we love him, but yeah, he's got to go. Like, we understand it. Like, we understand like the logic here of like why he's stepping down. But I'll just say one other thing though. People are, it's been reported in the media like I was forced out or, this, that, or the other thing. I mean, it doesn't matter because like no one will believe you. I mean, I sent people the receipts from June of my email to my board saying like, I am going to resign. This is not sustainable. And we worked on it for a couple of weeks. And then I doubled back after the debate because I was like, I just got totally vindicated. Everything that I've been saying, like all the crazy stuff, like I kind of feel like I'm vindicated. And then they try to take them out, and then all bets were off, and I knew that I just couldn't do it anymore, and that I wouldn't be focused on anything else except for the election. I'm not going to pretend that I speak for the Trump administration, and in fact, even though I do know some folks in those circles, like I don't think because of my rhetoric that I would be helpful as a spokesperson for anyone in the administration, because I'm not an idiot. And I know there's a
Despite
paper
your
trail.
Twitter handle.
Yeah, well, but that was never the point, right? You know, I've had some people say like, "Oh, how does it feel to get passed over as cryptos are?" I'm like, if I had known that David Sachs was going to get the nod, I would. He's like one of the few people that I would work for. He's a genius. Like I didn't know that he was on offer, that he would have even been like someone that would have gone into the administration. So to the extent that I had certainly no aspirations, to the extent that I would have even gone in, it would have been like, if my numbers call, like I will do this. But otherwise, I've already been kind of down the AI rabbit hole and have a bunch of things that I want to work on there. So I think this is a lot more organic than, I mean, I know there's a lot of people, it must have felt really good when I stepped down, like they feel like they got me, they got a scalp, but sorry, like that's not how it actually happened.
I want to say one more thing about the values and just the cypherpunk kind of ethos, right, where Bitcoin and everything comes from. So I have a list of 2009 to 2010 Bitcoiners. I get a response from these guys once every couple years to an email I sent 2 years ago. Very interesting anecdote I'll send you is around the Bitcoin conference. I was asked by David to essentially, hit this list, say like, does anybody want to come out and support the president in this historic moment? I got an unusually high response rate from that email. And what I found interesting is of the 5 responses, 3 of them were specifically about, I would never attend this. Donald Trump has nothing to do with Bitcoin, nothing the values that I signed up for. And in a couple instances, they specifically talked about the issue of, trans rights and trans values and just thinking that, they were cypherpunks. They wanted to kind of evolve, things forward and think towards the future.
Out of the 5 responses that you got on a Bitcoin mailing list to support Donald Trump, you got 3 responses about that issue.
Yeah.
And my point is, that is a roundabout way of saying, if you support this guy, you are on that team. It's a way to paint everybody in the same brush of you are anti-trans, you are anti-woman, you are a racist, you are an insurrectionist, you don't care about democracy if you support this guy.
And sure, look, I voted for Donald Trump, so,
Yeah, you voted for him, but the whole purpose of those types of conversations isn't to change your vote. It's to change who is allowed to talk about who they're voting for.
Right. I agree that a lot of that stuff has gone over the line, but we're just talking about being respectful to people, right? I mean,
you can be respectful of the people. I mean, I've had people of all different backgrounds on my teams in the past. You won't find a single person that's worked for me that would say that I was anything but kind towards them and tried to be.
Mm-hmm. But the result of this is that Bitcoin is partisan now.
It doesn't have to be. That's the Democrats' choice. Why? You have to ask why. I mean, it was such a loser for them. Why? And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that there's a lot. But I mean, again, we're conflating a couple different things. If you vote the wrong way, all of the worst parts of that person are basically going to be extrapolated, onto you. Like, you are for this person, so you are therefore sacrificing all of the other things that I care about and view as important, so that you can voice, and express your vote, even if it means that it's an existential priority for your team, your company, your family, your livelihood. But you're still supporting someone that doesn't think I should exist. Like, at some point, you have to say, like, sorry, but...
What would you say to people who just, like, didn't want to make that... There are people who didn't want to make that trade-off. They didn't want to be forced to think in that dichotomy.
You have to make a choice. I mean, inaction is a choice. You can... there's only 2 choices. There's 3 choices in the election. There's red, there's blue, and there's sitting it out. But don't make a mistake. That is a choice. People have this fantasy land interpretation of politics, like, oh, well, I don't like either. Well, you know what? Welcome to adulthood. You have to choose. You can express your preference, and if you don't like it, then don't complain about the results.
But I guess what I'm trying to paint in a picture here is that Bitcoin was born of trying to find something that was outside of the political process, right? That's Satoshi's whole genius here is moving money outside of the political process. That's that's kind of the root of the whole trade.
There's the saying, you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you at a certain size. And that's where crypto got to. That's it. So, I mean, that was the root cause of why I supported the president, why a lot of other people did. I also happen to think that there's a lot of other reasons that they're doing the right thing for the country. And that never would have come to the foreground if I hadn't felt like I was backed into a corner.
Do you think like the industry broadly made a choice to endorse Trump to the same extent that you did?
In terms of, obviously not.
Right.
No, I mean, but did they support him? I think if you poll the executives, I think, pretty much, I mean, you were at the event on the 17th, right? The inauguration ball.
Yes, yeah.
There weren't too many sad faces in the room that night. It was a celebration because people felt like President Trump is a lifeline, and he has governed like that for the industry. There's a lot going on. This is such a small issue in the grand scheme of things for national politics, but it's been a great thing from a legal clarity standpoint. It's been a great thing from a signaling standpoint. Getting the boot off the neck of the industry from other countries that are.
You've got a lot of people following.
Yeah.
But I guess what I was trying to get at again with the Satoshi thing is this idea that we have this responsibility to the people who built this even before us, who kind of saw the future in a certain way. You don't like that?
It's technology. No. Like it's open source technology that anyone can use for their purposes. I don't like the way that a lot of people have used crypto. Like, I think there's been a lot of scammy behavior. There's been, a lot of theft and hacks and scams, and it's not been a panacea. I think there's a lot of people that are extremely nice, and they smile, and they're very professional, and they put on a suit and tie, and they dress up well. And I think that their ethics are garbage, within the industry. So it's, you're never going to pass a purity test. Nor should we have purity tests for open tech. It's all about what people ultimately choose to do with crypto. And because it's open source, anyone can use it however they want to. Now, I have a certain type of ideal that I think we'd like to see from folks that are building in the space. A certain set of priorities that are going to be positive sum, that are going to help people, that are going to preserve civil liberties, things like that. All pretty basic, that I'm sure probably within that cypherpunk kind of core set of values. So I'm still all the way there. But I think to say, we need to do this one for Lord Satoshi, I mean, I think that's a bunch of bullshit.
Well, I'm trying to take a turn here.
And I think the turn here is, and I'd say where I try to be consistent is, I try to be consistent and truthful, even when it's unpopular. People might not like me. They might not like the tactics. But I don't think that anyone would ever accuse me of being shy about my version of the truth. Or that I've ever lied to somebody.
Well, so let's talk about your version of the truth as it relates to Bitcoin and crypto stuff. This is probably the area where we've talked the most historically. You tweeted recently, buy Bitcoin. Everything else has failed the values test. There's digital gold and there's tokenized block space and compute. My favorite is in 15 years, we've done Bitcoin and stables with a dash of toys. It's dishonest to pretend Bitcoin is a subset of crypto at this point. And so I'm interested in your journey to this point because, I maybe broke on that path a little bit earlier than yourself, kind of became more interested in just Bitcoin only, or specifically. With Messari, there was a moment where we were trying to kind of make sense of this great Cambrian explosion of cryptos. We maybe thought we were going to find all these secrets to economics. It sounds like you think that the crypto experiment beyond Bitcoin has been disappointing.
I mean, I don't even know how many people would argue that right now. I think a lot of people are feeling the same frustration that I felt, 6-12 months ago. And, only part of it was political. I mean, one of the reasons that, I felt comfortable making the leap that I did is, not only was it existential, but also, we had to get over the, I think, primary excuse that was holding the industry back of, well, if only we had clarity, then there would be all these kind of magical solutions that would rain down from above.
Right. If only we weren't securities, there'd be all these.
It's put up or shut up time now, right? And you haven't really seen that much incremental movement in the last few months since Donald Trump was elected.
Maybe just to wind all the way back and just
but to get back to it, I've said this for years. I think that Bitcoin is novel money, is a form of money secured by novel tech, and I think crypto is novel technology that is secured by different forms of private money. Very different, right? The initial core vision of Bitcoin was essentially to be a digital gold equivalent and a check on out of control government spending. That thesis has held up remarkably well. And it's starting to get, institutional buy-in, sovereign buy-in, all the things, right? There's clear product market fit there.
I just want to give a context of our paths, right? And from my perspective. So when we started, I was agnostic.
Yeah.
You were a Bitcoin believer. Maybe towards the 15, 16 era.
Well, I'm still a believer in the potential of crypto.
Well, let me finish. Yeah. The 15, 16 era, I remember being the one who was more interested in the Ethereum stuff, just thinking that it was conceptually interesting. Yourself, maybe a bit of a laggard to that. Flash forward to 1920, Messari, you're kind of all in on trying to figure out intellectually how can we differentiate these crypto assets. Maybe there is this beautiful economic diversity that's never existed before. There will be all these assets to do all these things. I was kind of waning on that. Now we're here, and are we in ideological alignment here? How much are we aligning? This is my point. Get your tweets, because it sounds like you're saying that what have crypto assets achieved beyond Bitcoin is the question.
Well, I think there's a difference between the potential and the reality, right? But the issue with crypto is, Bitcoin has both potential and has actually achieved, I think, a core part of...
Often despite us.
Often despite, yes, which is almost a clearer version of product market fit when you have people that don't imbue the values of Lord Satoshi, who you would like everybody to emulate. But despite that, it's still survived. You can't say the same thing about crypto.
No.
And, I made the comment that in some respects, open source, kind of crypto it's almost like the U.S. Constitution. The founders wrote the Constitution assuming a religious people and a moral people and a high trust society. Constitution doesn't work in a low trust society. Crypto only really works if the moral foundation is there. And I think the reason is because the mechanics and the incentives are so gameable otherwise. Because they're
you mean just the fact that you can launch it and claim anything you want about
exactly. You can claim anything you want about it. You can have whatever economics you want. Bitcoin is magical in the sense that it was, it was created. The core has not changed, right? The core
very little
design has changed. Basically, not at all when it comes to the supply schedule, the why, the how is the chain secure?
But the 17 era that Messari was born out of was one where the great majority of capital thought that Bitcoin was failing and that this next generation of technology was succeeding in spite of Bitcoin.
Well, I never thought that. My point is I thought that both would coexist, but I thought that Bitcoin had a very unique, kind of clear, product market fit, and that crypto was also interesting, but it was very different. And I've always kind of mentally had them in two different buckets. And the reason for something like Messari was these are humans that are basically building their own little fiat kingdoms and their own token distribution schedules and their own rules of the road. Let's at least have someone hold them accountable and actually keep track of. I can't tell you how many projects have lost track of their own supply schedules, or when they said tokens were going to unlock for a given member of the team, or they said governance was going to work one way and it works another. That is all too common because in crypto people are just kind of making it up as they go along, and there's no real accountability because they're proof of stake systems, or you can kind of game it with very minimal human intervention. And kind of control over these code bases. Bitcoin is fundamentally different in terms of how hard it is to change the protocol, how immune it's been to any type of manipulation for some of its core rules. For better and for worse. I'd say in 2017, there was a bunch of debates about that Bitcoin community kind of got through, but you basically just multiply that by
Sure, but
1,000,
at that time,
10,000.
I remember you wrote that Medium post about the governance of Bitcoin, where you still saw Bitcoin as an ineffective governance system at that time. I would argue. You talked about the three branches being the miners, the developers, and the users.
Well, I think I explained where the schism was. I don't think that I necessarily said that it was a flawed system. If anything, the only thing that I've said about Bitcoin is, the jury's still out on what happens when the mining reward gets below a certain threshold in terms of the security.
Well, you've talked about increasing the supply. You've talked about increasing the block size. You were supportive of some of those ideas when it was controversial.
Well, I mean, I think I actually was on the side of this small blockers, or this not whatever the DCG, kind of party line, the grand bargain, or whatever they call the New York agreement, whatever they call it. Right, that we're going way back, and this is like esoterica for people that are tuning in.
You built a company that is viewed as a.
I thought Bitcoin was fine. I thought the problem was in all of these tokens that we're launching and the rule sets and the accountability around how they're going to be governed over time. And a core part of that was, let's not micromanage the innovators, but let's at least make sure that there's some transparency to their behavior and what they're doing.
But what other than building the back-end infrastructure for a stablecoin apparatus for the U.S. government, what is the crypto apparatus doing now in your view?
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I haven't really seen much. Right now it is. I mean, Bitcoin is got clear product market fit. I think stable coins, dollar-denominated stable coins are incredibly powerful for payments, and I think they provide a invaluable source of demand for U.S. Treasuries at a time that we're dealing with unsustainable debt, and I think some of the tools and like infrastructure that's been built is valuable, but who's using it, right? Who's using the block space? What assets are flowing through decentralized exchanges? What is getting lent? What is basically where are the users, right? Yeah. Outside of stablecoin payments, where are the users?
I would say the crypto asset has been largely disappointing, right? We thought that there would be this great many types of crypto assets.
And frankly, I think
they weren't.
I think a lot of people get burnt out on crypto and the fact that the industry does not seem to be getting better or more of a net positive for society. Versus like a value extractive mechanism that rewards the insiders. The reason that's a tough way to build a community or an ecosystem.
I went over to Bitcoin is that, I told Joe Lubin this recently, I was just disgusted with the ICO stuff. I didn't like what the founders were doing. I saw people that I knew and respected make business decisions. They were building private blockchain things that they pivoted and sold to the public for $200 million.
I think a good way to look at the values of crypto right now is look at all the people that are wealthy. Think about how they made their wealth, and then consider if they built anything of lasting value.
A lot of them haven't.
Vast majority have not. I think that's your answer right there.
Right, but that's why I was disgusted with.
Well, but you and I can have our personal opinions, but my point is, I don't think it matters what we think. The overarching point and the overarching problem with crypto, and where ethics catch up with you. And I'm not trying to moralize or pretend that I'm some personal saint. We've covered a lot of ground.
You are building a moral AI.
Well, we can get to that. But like, I'm not trying to virtue signal here. I'm trying to diagnose and explain what I think is a root problem that the industry has, that it has not taken seriously for a long time. And I have, for all of my flaws, tried to work around this problem area of how do we actually build a better, more sustainable foundation. And we haven't. And that catches up with you. It catches up with you in meme coins. It catches up with you in ICOs. It catches up with you with all the thefts and frauds. It catches up with you not having an adequate customer support function at Coinbase. Like, it's cumulative. And people can pretend that's not the case and pretend that this is all about inclusivity and micropayments and, the other 6 billion,
but that messaging is
so much. Yeah. So much. Yeah. So much that messaging, I think people feel guilty and dirty even saying it at this point, because they know it's not true. The one thing that we do have, stablecoins, right? That is a rock to build on. Can we get payments right? Can you go from stablecoins to other real world tokenized assets? Can you fix this disclosure problem, within the industry? Can you have like a reset to normal valuations? For 90 9% of the assets that are basically built on air. I think all those things are going to have to happen. And when that happens, you can start to build from a more sustainable foundation. So I do think that most of the industry is going to go through some type of corrective period where some of that gets worked out. I think, ironically, the one reason that hasn't happened, it's maybe arguably starting to happen slowly in some respects, but one of the reasons I think that hasn't happened is because of the wealth effect that's created by Bitcoin and Ether and some of the other winning currencies, where it's almost like people have enough money where there's a lower bound where it will get recycled, even into bad projects downstream. So I think, unfortunately, that's probably one of the things that has forestalled a general cleanup
or really healthy washout.
It does seem like and we had it in 2018, right? You had some really interesting assets that got totally torched in the post-ICO carnage, and the teams that actually kept building were building interesting infrastructure, came back and rallied. But the core idea of the crypto space, it seems like at some point, was this idea that you would have many types of assets and monies that were discovered. There were different types of consensus mechanisms and node running combinations, and we would define all these new types of assets.
But you were never going to get away from the core problem of, finance has been honed over a long period of time. And I'm not saying that we need to be running discounted cash flow analysis and all this academic math on what the fair value of a token is. But you can only break the laws of financial physics and supply and demand for so long before it catches up with you. Bitcoin is fundamentally different. It's being treated as a digital complement to gold. So you can value it on a relative basis. You can think about what does a digital asset that's secured by computing look like, that has this Lindy effect, that has become this global shelling point in a very high debt environment.
There is a friction between the Bitcoin and crypto side of the space, and it does.
Because everything else needs to be valued as if it's a shared cooperative, right? There's some fees that accrue to the token holders, or some real value that accrues to the token holders. There's one Bitcoin. There's one digital money right now, and then everything else, there's a pretty steep fall off as to what the quality of that digital money is. And frankly, most of the time, it should be valued as money. It should be valued like a decentralized stock.
What do you make of the it does feel like there's a big capital flooding confidence crisis dealing on right now. And I feel like that is coloring a lot of the kind of trough of disillusionment right now.
It's not clear what the crypto industry outside of Bitcoin is building at all at this point. A lot of the hopes, it seems like, have proven inaccurate. Where does that go?
I'm not trying to be too negative on the potential for the entire industry, but again, what I'm trying to point out is it is tough to sustain momentum when the people that get rewarded in crypto tend to be worse on average.
Sure, yeah. Agreed.
Than the people that have actually built interesting infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Venn diagram of people that have both created value and earned value in the form of their token appreciating, it's rather small. And for the most part, you have a lot of people that made a lot of money, delivered next to nothing, and then their token price ticks down. And who's on the hook for that? It's not the people that started the...
Let me ask this question a different way. Are we out of the age of cryptocurrency where there's competition at the technological layer? This is figured out at this point, according to you.
No, I think there will always be competition at the technological layer, but it's tough to sustain. I mean, there's a reason that companies stay private, right? You're starting to see the worst elements of being a public company infect pretty much every corner of the crypto market because people only care about the number going up.
Well, Dave Portnoy has the famous quote, which is, I held the token, I was a long-term holder, I held it for an hour and a half.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth to that.
Well, but these are fundamental problems with just the nature of money, right? And this has been the discussion in Bitcoin for the last, several years, which is that we can't get out, we can't escape the laws of economics in crypto. I think there was earlier parts in the industry where we thought that was possible. We thought we would figure out all these kind of new crypto economic paradigms, and I don't think that's panned out.
Some of that is regulatory. Uniswap is a good example, right? The inability to turn on the fees for Uniswap, the protocol, and the constant kind of barrage against Uniswap Labs as a company basically forced them to not only not turn on fees for the underlying protocol, but then force them to monetize their own front end. So it's like they're double dipping, and the token holders are just kind of like left out, twirling in the wind. Yeah, there are some of these like legal structural problems that I think will get resolved with a reasonable administration and some leaders that understand how these things work. But that's like one project. How many projects have?
There's a facade of CoinMarketCap, right? When you look at CoinMarketCap in the morning, you see thousands and thousands of assets, and I think the assumption that you make by default, just by visual presentation, is that all of these things are unique and special and different, and that they're all useful in their own way. And it seems like that isn't true. So where does this consolidate down to? If you are leaving the industry and leaving us with your wisdom, it's like, where does this page of assets exist, or do we whittle down to a few or maybe one?
I mean, I don't have anything else to. I don't have anything else to contribute. What I hope that at the end of the day I will have contributed is, I help weed out half a dozen bad actors in the space, myself. We talked about Mt. Gox. I was early to call out the shenanigans of the grayscale Genesis trade and how toxic that was. I was on the other side of the political, debate and shenanigans of FTX in 2022. I took all the arrows with Gary Gensler and kind of attacking the Democrats and exposing like some of the games that they had and tried to get as much leverage for us as possible by doing that work. And it still comes up. Oh, well, you invested in Terra. It's like, you know what? My back is getting fucking heavy. Who else is doing the diligence? Like, I feel like I've done what I could. I worked my ass off for a decade. I built a great team, a couple of great teams. You were on one of them. And I'm proud of what we did at DCG in the early days, at CoinDesk, and I still think that there's a very bright future for Messari, especially with me out of the picture and not creating a distraction for the team. But I'm satisfied with my contributions. I think you need more people that are going to be building for the long term, for the right reasons. And there's no excuse now because you have a slate of regulators that's as good as it's ever going to get when it comes to regulatory clarity. So if you can't figure out a way to build useful tools and useful assets and things that achieve mass product market fit, that's only going to be solved by good entrepreneurs. Like, there's no pearls of wisdom that I could share. There's also no excuses anymore.
Well, you keep going back to the right reasons. Like, what are the right reasons?
One right reason is to not be zero sum with your end users and for everything to be like player versus player from an economic standpoint. It just rewards the insiders. We're running out of suckers at the table is one way to put it. And you can only do that so many times and go back to the well and the same victims, basically, before it gets real old. And has crypto made a bunch of people very wealthy? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'll just tell you personally, like I'm happy that I spent time in the industry, but most of that was riding, Bitcoin from 2013 for a dozen years for all those ups and downs. That's never been. I don't think that I ever. Well, I don't think. I know that I never enriched myself on the back of like a greater fool. And in fact, there's a couple things, with the meme coin market, I was invested in like Whiff and Bowden and, did a little bit of that crap last year, mostly as a protest. Cause like that was, I was kind of cynical at that point. I was like, this is what we've kind of resorted to and what we've become because you can't build anything else. But I rode one of those meme coins that I was in, pretty much all the way to zero, like all the way up and all the way back down, because I was in a couple of the group chats and I knew that the founders were having, a couple of problems. And I'm like, well, I know this information now, so I'm not going to go and, and after I was kind of publicly like known in the group chat, I'm not going to, just.
But your Brian Armstrongs and those types of, they really do think we're going to live in a hyper-financed world, right? Where me and you are in this interview right now, and there's portfolios managed by AI that are trading our tokens, the music that we own and the websites that we own.
I'll be the first person to admit that we're probably in the trough of disillusionment right now. But my general point is the only way to get out of that is for more people.
But you still think there's an answer out there for the crypto space?
I mean, how long did it take Linux? Open source, software basically was left for dead in the 90s and had a resurgence when, mobile phones came out as the back end for, a lot of mobile operating systems. So these things can lay in fallow for a long time. We talked about this before the camera started rolling. I think the rise in AI does make crypto more valuable if you have, people that are investing in, fingerprinting and digital provenance and, putting
the thing I like about
Bitcoin
is I'm in this interview, it's sitting there, nothing's going to happen to it. I don't need to be worried about trading this complex portfolio while I'm doing something with my life.
But my point is that is one use case, which is just like, it's my hedge against the world going to shit. It's totally different from the rest of the tech that's been built. Hypothetically, the rest of the tech that's been built, there should be app stores where people are like, going to the equivalent of the iTunes store and they're downloading all these like decentralized apps.
But doesn't that just revert to the Dave Portnoy with the meme coin at the end of the day? Like, isn't that where this ended up?
That's where we are right now because everything has become about.
So you don't think Pump.Fun that was what crypto was always going to become? Short time horizons, many tokens, you can always put your money
I think that the speculative undercurrents have kind of made it so. But my point is when crypto actually if we come out the other side of this and you have actually useful applications, they're going to be things that people use, not just speculate on. And the entire issue that we have is people aren't fucking using these things.
I agree. I've worked in this industry for
here's what people
years.
use it for. Use stable coins, use it for over collateralized loans to basically, borrow against your accumulated, wealth in Bitcoin without taking a taxable, hit, or ETH or whatever else. You use it for trading shitcoins back and forth, on decentralized exchanges, for issuing assets, for, including NFTs and things like that. And the reality is, there are a few exceptions like ENS for, kind of global identifiers and like they found a sustainable model I think is interesting. So there are like a few pockets, a few kind of like one-offs that do have some real value, but it just, the weight and the gravity well around crypto from a user standpoint this is not a fun place to be.
So why are you leaving?
I already left a long time ago.
Right, but why? Why are you leaving? If you think there's still the bright future for the crypto side.
A, I think it's going to take a long time. B, I don't know exactly what applications are going to be interesting. That just, for me personally, I have not had another crypto idea that I'm excited about. I am excited about artificial intelligence, and I actually think that,
the way that things are going politically, socially, economically, and in tech, AI in particular, we have a very high variance decade ahead of us. And there's some really bad outcomes that I think we can experience both, as Americans and more globally. But I generally think that, AI and making sure that artificial general intelligence is well aligned and actually used well is a 100 times bigger and more important challenge than anything in crypto right now.
Even like it was something like you're patriotic, you've got this new political fervor, getting stable coins globally, that's a huge opportunity,
other people can do that. I'm like, congratulations Circle and Paxos and Tether, like they're going to do well and they should. And that is,
but the patriotic Republican Ryan that, is seeing this doesn't want to get involved in.
It's not like that. So first of all, I think there's a total political realignment. Trump is already a lame duck. He likes to rile people up and say he's going to run for a third term. What he does when he says things like that is essentially say, stop talking about the fact that I'm a lame duck. That's like the parenthetical. Because as soon as he says, I'm not going to run for a third term, obviously, which everybody knows, because he'll be 82, then that's the narrative that the press goes with. It's like, see, like he's going to be out soon. All we need to do is wait him out. So what does he say? I might run for a third term.
But he has nothing in his way right now. He has a full majority in the House and Senate.
No, nothing right now. But my point, like, I'm not going to die on the Republican Hill. That's not what I care about. That's not what gets me up in the morning. What does get me up in the morning is my concern that we are totally fucking off the rails from a societal standpoint. And I think a lot of it, going back to even like the really hairy issue that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be upset about, like it has to do with our chronic inability to have truthful conversations and to even prioritize or accept that truth exists, right? It's essentially like, you know, you either believe that there is a true north, there is an objective version of truth, there is an aspirational morality that we should have and an aspirational set of ethics, or you think that everything is relative and everything is in the eye of the beholder. And, you know.
But don't we use the legal system to sort that out? Isn't that?
Yes, but within the legal system, within the political system, my point is those are two very philosophically different camps and schools that pervade all levels of society. And I'll give you an example with AI. So in the name of trust and safety and equality and whatever, Google unveiled Gemini last year, and what'd you see? Black George Washington, Native American Nazis. You know, it was a joke, and people made fun of it and lampooned it. And you know what Google's response was? Their response was, well, this is like an MVP, and clearly something went wrong. They fixed it. That doesn't happen anymore. But
really all that's happened is the lies that led to that output, the polite, nice lies that led to that output in the name of equality or you know, fairness or radical egalitarianism. Everybody is equal. Everybody is exactly the same. Like, you know, we must have, you know, these overrides in these systems to, you know, basically account for some version of 2020, 2021, like, you know, Twitter, Facebook, you know, leftist like censorship teams. At some point, that just gets more and more insidious and baked into everything that's getting taught to AI. Sure. Yeah. Right. It's the same thing that we have in the universities, right? Like, you know, 95% of the university faculties are, you know, progressive or, you know, are very far to the left. So those values.
But this is like in some sense an age-old problem. I was listening to Pete Seeger's song from the 1920s, and he's talking about, you know, what did the kids learn at school today? And the refrain is, you know, that the government never lies, the Washington was always right. That's what I learned in school today. And
yeah,
the idea that our institutions are in some ways antithetical to, you know, what we're trying to achieve as humans is age-old.
Yes, and I think it's one of the most important problems we have to solve right now. My point is, I think how these AI systems are getting trained, that's the point of maximum leverage right now, for, you know, getting any real social change and kind of resetting the faults that we have. If you look at every big tech company in Silicon Valley right now, and you know, you ask 100 different questions that are, you know, political or social or you know, at all charged. You will have, and you will see overrides and like the politically correct version of the answer versus the truthful version of the answer. I'd say 90% of the time. That is going to catch up with us, and it can catch up with us in a few different ways. But, you know, one of them is if we get to a point where the pendulum swings in 2028 the other direction politically, you know, you'll have pretty extreme crackdowns on what is allowed, and you'll have the same, you know, bullshit that we had in 2020 and 2021 in terms of, you know, censorship and hate speech and wrongthink. You know, that will get baked into some of these systems, and it will be tough to get out of that. And after you've left crypto,
wow, I'm still toiling away here. Your legacy, if this is the end for you and crypto, what do you feel like you provided there?
I think Bitcoin went
parabolic and
Sure, but I still think
that
Bitcoin succeeded despite all of this.
yeah, that's maybe true. I mean, honestly,
I don't know how much credit we can take in Bitcoin.
no, I don't think so. I will say, I still am hopeful for crypto to live up to what I thought was its early potential. I hope that my kind of friends and colleagues that remain in the industry are able to kind of knock out some killer use cases and actually onboard billions of users for a variety of new tools. And I think the companies that I started or were involved with are still an important part of that, for especially in terms of the information landscape. So I'm rooting for them, and I hope that they can solve some of these some of the problems that we set out to solve years ago. But I'm not really looking backwards at this point. I think I built some good teams. We won an election. A lot of people are not happy with who won the election, but from my vantage point, I'm thrilled that crypto is able to play a part, and the capital of crypto is able to play a part in propelling Donald Trump over the line. And now it's just a matter of getting my attention. So I'm rooting for folks from the sidelines, and I still have some investments in the space, but I think the much more important problem to be tackled right now is AI.
Ryan Selkis, the final interview, his final words on crypto you're watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you're still watching, smash that like button and subscribe. Give us retweets or comments on X. We'll wish you the best, sir. Appreciate you coming on the platform.
Thank you.
This has been a Blockworks podcast.